I'm gonna cut my audio too.
Okay. All right, so we should be recording now, and now I'm going to start the broadcast. Hi, everyone. Welcome, welcome. We're going to give it a minute or two to kick things off before we kick things off, because we're expecting quite a lot of people to tune in tonight. Feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat and let us know where you're tuning in from. Lots of familiar names. Good to see people. Thanks for being here. Portland, Illinois, London. That's cool. This is great. See, this is why it's so awesome when we do these virtual events. We're so happy that we can bring in an audience from all over the world for our programs. Hi,
I'm
Glenn.
just I'm
Hi,
scrolling through the
Julie.
names to see who's here.
Yeah, a lot of familiar names and faces. Well, names. I'm gonna apologize right now and tell everyone that I'm tuning in from home because I have a really bad head cold. So please bear with me if I'm a little loopy during this. I really appreciate you guys all joining us tonight. We'll give it another minute or so for people to keep logging in.
Somebody from India?
India, amazing.
I think I know that guy.
Fantastic. Hi everyone. Great. Okay. Well, I think uh I think I think we'll get started. So, hello everybody. I'm Caitlin McGurk. I'm the curator of comics and cartoon art and associate professor at The Ohio State University's Billy Ireland Cartoon Library and Museum. Thank you all so much for joining us for this very special program tonight with curator, cartoonist, and scholar Brian Walker. Brian is going to be speaking with us tonight about the new edition of his father, Mort Walker's book, The Lexicon of Comicana, which was recently republished by New York Review Comics after being out of print for far too long. The Lexicon is one of the most beloved and delightful books in the world of comics and has given generations of cartoonists and comics fans a silly but sincere language with which to discuss some of the more unique elements of the art form. If you haven't gotten your hands on a copy of the newest edition yet, please be sure to. It includes a new foreword by Chris Ware and additional material from Brian himself that he'll be talking a bit about tonight. This evening's event is taking place as part of Will Eisner Week, an annual celebration honoring the legacy of Will Eisner, held on the week of his birthday. For those unfamiliar, Will Eisner was a key figure in the birth of the comic book industry and later helped launch the advent of the graphic novel with works like A Contract with God, The Building, Dropsy Avenue, and so many more. Eisner was a major advocate of comics as a legitimate art form and storytelling medium, and his influence as an artist, editor, entrepreneur, and educator can be felt across the field today. This international celebration is dedicated to promoting graphic novel literacy, free speech, and the sequential arts writ large. Eisner was a huge champion of education with comics and about comics, and so we're really pleased to continue the focus of our Will Eisner Week programs each year with a scholarly presentation. You can discover other Will Eisner Week events happening across the globe by visiting willeisner.com. We would also like to express our gratitude to Nancy and Carl Gropper of the Will and Ann Eisner Family Foundation for their continual support of the Billy Ireland Cartoon Library and Museum, including the financial support of our Lucy Shelton Caswell Research Award, named for the founding curator of the Cartoon Library. I love this picture of Eisner and Miss Caswell shown here so much. The Billy Ireland is also really a proud home of the Will Eisner collection. To find out more about accessing the Eisner collection, you can visit us at cartoons.osu.edu. Before we begin, I'd like to just review some Zoom housekeeping. This presentation will be about 20 to 30 minutes long, followed by an audience Q&A. You've been automatically muted by the host and your video is off. You should have access to your audio settings to chat, raise your hand, and put material into the Q&A that you'd like to ask about. You can use chat to communicate with the hosts or with all attendees. You can click the chat icon to open up the window and type. Be sure to specify whether you want your chat to go to all the attendees or just to the hosts. We ask that you please submit all of your official questions for Brian into the Q&A feature, not the chat. If you enter your questions into the chat, we might not see them, so please do use the Q&A function. Feel free to submit a question at any time during the event. I'll be monitoring this and will save the questions for Brian until the end. Please keep your discussions and questions relevant to this presentation. Okay, so now I'd like to officially introduce our very special guest this evening, Brian Walker. Brian Walker has a diverse background in professional cartooning and cartoon scholarship. He is one of the founders and former directors of the Museum of Cartoon Art, where he worked from 1974 to 1992. Since 1984, Brian has been part of the creative team that produces the comic strips Beetle Bailey and High and Lois. He has written, edited, or contributed to 55 books on cartoon art, including The Definitive History, The Comics, the complete collection published by Abrams Comic Art. He taught a course in cartoon history at the School of Visual Arts and has served as curator for 75 cartoon exhibitions, including the Sunday Funnies, 100 Years of Comics in American Life at the Barnum Museum in Bridgeport, Connecticut, 100 Years of American Comics at the Belgian Center for Comic Art, and Masters of American Comics at the Hammer Museum and the Museum of Contemporary Art in Los Angeles, as well as George Harriman, Crazy Cat is Crazy Cat at the Reina Sofia Museum in Madrid. He was also editor-in-chief of Collector's Showcase magazine from 1997 to 2000 and is the founder and current chairman of the Connecticut chapter of the National Cartoonist Society. Brian is a longtime friend of the Billy Irelands and has also curated many exhibits for our galleries. Our relationship with the Walker family is an essential part of the Billy Irelands history, and we are proud to preserve the former holdings of the Museum of Cartoon Art within our collections. We are all really big fans of Brian's and so grateful that he's willing to share this new edition of his late father's book with us. I do want to mention that Brian's slideshow has some really amazing, very high-res art images in it, and during our test run, we noticed that there's a little bit of a lag when he advances the slides, so apologies in advance for that, but they are worth the glitch. So, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Brian Walker for our main presentation this evening.
It's nice to be here. Um, I think Caitlin just said it all. It's it's a little exhausting to read that resume. It's a lot of stuff, but I'm very pleased to be doing this now. I was good friends with Will Eisner. He was on the board of the Museum of Cartoon Art and actually lived very close to the museum when it was in Boca Raton in Florida. So I would always see him when I went down there. And in fact, he was the one that wrote my recommendation when I taught at the School of Visual Arts. I did a Will Eisner retrospective at the museum back in the 1980s and got to know him better then. So he was a wonderful man and a real genius of comic art. So this is a great tribute to him. So I guess I'll get started. I'm going to share my screen now. Let's hope this works the way it's supposed to. Okay, now hopefully you're just seeing the slide.
Yep, looks good.
Okay. So as Caitlin just told you, the Lexicon of Comicana was originally published in 1980. It was out of print for many years and has recently been reissued by New York Review of Comics, which is part of New York Review of Books, with a foreword by Chris Ware. Chris was his foreword is great. He talks about when he went to the University of Texas and he had a copy of this book, and he and all his friends used to use these terms ironically with each other. They were self-described comic nerds, like nice plewds on your character there. The following slides are from the appendix that I did, which is at the back of the book, which I added on to later on. Whoops, went too far there. Okay, sorry. All right, here we go. Graphic storytelling can be traced back to our earliest ancestors, like European, like Egyptian hieroglyphics, pictograms, that kind of stuff. European artists used various forms of speech balloons in their cartoons. American newspaper cartoonists continued to add to this graphic language in their opening years of the 20th century. Rudolph Dirks pioneered such visual devices as motion lines, stars of pain, footprints, dotted eyesight lines, sweat beads, and dust clouds in the Katzenjammer Kids. Frederick Opper perfected the flop and Happy Hooligan as characters were booted or tossed out of the panels, flipping head over heels. I don't know what's going on here. It's not advancing. Yeah. Bud Fisher incorporated three devices in this panel from a 1924 Mutt and Jeff strip: dotted eyesight lines, sweat drops, and a well-placed sign. George Harriman regularly used the brick for a symbol, as Crazy Cat misinterprets Ignaz's missile as a sign of affection. Otto Mesmer frequently used the sawing log to show Felix snoozing. Billy DeBeck was also a prolific master of comic devices. In this example, Barney Google unleashes a torrent of Grolixes, otherwise known as swear words. The flop continued to be a popular visual device, particularly in screwball strips like Jerry on the Job by Walter Hoban on the left and Salesman Sam by C.D. Small on the right. In this panel from George McManus's Bringing Up Father, Maggie plays and sings off key for Jiggs. How do you know it's off key? Look at Jiggs's expression and the dog's as well. The unique star and donut-shaped symbols in Polly and her pals came to be known as Starrett-isms. So he invented his own devices. Whoops, I went too far there. Damn it. Action scenes in comics were illustrated with swalloops and stars, as in these examples from E.C. Segar's Popeye and Milk Gross's Dave's Delicatessen. In the upper left, Martin Branner's Rinky Dinks run from a haunted house expressing their fear with loud vocalizations. Below left is an example of Ernie Bushmiller's cryptic symbol, the three rocks. Don't ask me to explain what that means. In the upper right, Betty's cumulus balloons reveal her dreams of marriage to Archie. In the bottom right panel, a clap of thunder causes Dagwood to scatter the contents of his famous sandwich. Walt Kelly utilized a variety of comic devices in Pogo, including different lettering styles to reflect the quirks of characters, such as P.T. Bridgeport on the top and Deacon Muskrat at the bottom. In this Pogo Sunday page, Churchy LaFemme and Howland Al bat around some thought-provoking questions. It's early meta. In 1961, Mort Walker and Jerry Dumas created a unique comic about the comics. Sam's strip starred a character who runs his own comic strip with the help of an assistant. It featured many traditional cartoon devices, shown here, as well as guest appearances by famous characters from the Funnies and beyond. It went over the head of most readers and only lasted a little over a year. Mort made prolific uses of Comicana devices in his two most successful strips, Beetle Bailey and High and Lois. Sarge could clean up his maledicta quickly when the chaplain was in earshot. Griffiths and Heights follow High through the house as he brings good news to Lois. Mort was inspired by earlier research into the language of lines when he developed the nomenclature and devices he compiled in the Lexicon of Comicana. This early piece by Gasoline Alley creator Frank King appeared in Cartoons magazine in 1915. So this stuff goes way back. This article, which Mort credits in the lexicon, was written by humorist Charles D. Rice and ran in This Week magazine on March 24th, 1946. It was also syndicated to newspapers and reprinted in a cartoon compilation book, What's Funny About That, in 1954. You can see there's some of the same plewds and squeens and words like that that Mort borrowed. Oops, damn it. On the left are some spot drawings Mort drew for the National Cartoonist Society newsletter in 1964. 4 years later, he wrote a three-page article for the NCS newsletter entitled "Let's Get Down to Grawlixes." So you could see this evolved over time. The original Museum of Cartoon Art opened in the Mead Mansion in Greenwich, Connecticut on August 11th, 1974. I had just graduated from college and was recruited to clean up and paint the old house, seen here in the background. I was soon enlisted to start putting up exhibits. One of the first displays we did was a series of felt tip drawings by Mort titled The Lexicon of Comicana. These original panels are still in the museum collection at the Billy Island Cartoon Library and Museum and were on display in the opening exhibit on November 16th, 2013. Mort was in attendance and posed in front of his drawings with Caitlin. The lexicon exhibit was so popular with visitors that Mort decided to do a book-length treatment. I helped him edit it. My future wife, Abby, did the paste-ups, and my good friend Phil Nelson designed the cover. A big order from Walden Books helped boost the sales when the book was published in 1980. It eventually was translated into other language. This is the Danish edition. And some of the terms were also included in various dictionaries. The book eventually went out of print. Next, I'm going to show you some selected pages from the book. Most of these are self-explanatory and very visual and familiar to many of you, so I don't need to provide too much explanation. Basic Comicana starts with facial expression, also known as tetiology. It includes oculama for the eyes, oralology for mouths, and protusilation for tongues. It's a real tongue twister, that word. So all these drawings were by Mort. These elements can be combined to produce total tetiology, which can express a variety of motions and attitudes. It's not advancing. Bodybuilding in comics involves using shapes like beans, balloons, and boxes to construct morphs, not to be confused with Mort. Ideally, these can be recognized immediately in silhouette. Mort always said, if you a well-designed character can always be recognized in silhouette. Adding details to these figures can help to create certain types, stereotypes, such as to your typical doctor, a farmer, tramps, hillbillies, various other types that we recognize. Political cartoonists use a wide variety of stereotypes and also feature unique characters like Santa Claus, the Republican elephant, and the Democratic donkey, all of whom were popularized by Thomas Nast in the 19th century. Special symbols called emanata can be added to reveal emotions in different states of mind. Among these are plewds, squeens, and spurls. Emanata can also be used with inanimate objects like a pie or a cup of coffee. Vites, dites, heights, and briffets can be employed to suggest light reflections, speed, and gravitational pull. Curved lines or sphericazia can denote a golf swing or a punch with the use of swalloops and widowpeas. Other types of sphericazia, known as trons, can be put to various uses. Cartoonists use cross-hatching to create shading in their comics. Many cartoonists have distinctive styles of cross-hatching. I love these pages. Fumetti, which is derived from the Italian word fumo or smoke, is used to describe comics in general and speech balloons more specifically. These are used above characters' heads to show what they are saying or thinking and can also express various types of communication. So there's one for whispering and another one for electronic devices and various things like that. Sequential storytelling in comics is made possible with the use of borders and panels. These come in a variety of shapes and styles. Words that imitate natural sounds or onomatopoeia can add a sonic element to the language of comics. Terms like plop, blam, swoosh, and zoom are common, but cartoonists also create their own unique sound effects. Possibilities are endless. Other tricks of the trade can be categorized under the general heading of symbolia. These visual cliches have been used for decades and are familiar to most readers. Many of these visual tropes do not actually exist in the real world, but they live on in the panels of our popular mythology. Newspaper cartoonists are not permitted to use certain words in their strips, so they have learned to replace them with yarns, quimps, niddles, and grawlixes. Many other symbols can also be added to express more extreme anger and cursing. It's a clever way that they get around censorship. Cartoonists often distort the laws of nature to exaggerate an anatomy or play with time. So you can see Popeye's arms there. Don't look like anybody you've ever seen. And comic characters can age. Some don't, some do. There are critics of violence in the comics. We know that. But cartoonists know that comic violence or mayhemia tends not to be permanent. So Beetle Bailey can get beaten up into a little pile of pieces on the ground by Sarge, and the next day he's all put back together again. The magic of the comics. Cartoonists can break rules and defy logic in the service of a gag, anything for a laugh. So Sarge can have a one tooth, a mouthful of teeth. Nobody cares. Flowers can talk, schools can talk, all kinds of things can happen. There are two major schools of comics, which have been described as Bigfoot or Five Finger. In Bigfoot cartoons, characters have three fingers and a thumb and bulbous feet, like Mickey Mouse. Five Finger artists draw hands and feet more realistically. Cartoonists in all genres often use labeling to clarify their messages. In comics, certain situations appear over and over and over again and never seem to lose their appeal. Famous desert island jokes. Here are a few examples of these visual cliches. Readers are familiar with these scenarios, even if they have never encountered them in real life. The Lexicon of Comicana was originally intended to be a spoof of the old cartoon instruction books. These how-to lessons reveal some of cartooning's not so well-kept secrets. So these are similar to some of the early spot drawings that Mort did in the NCS newsletters. Of course, Mort couldn't resist adding visual punchlines to the step-by-step progressions. So most of these have a gag at the end. And some slightly risque and surreal humor. Making mistakes is part of the learning process. So Mort shared some of the common mistakes that cartoonists make. The original lexicon ended with a final comment about how life begins and ends with symbols. So in the appendix, I look at visual humor in contemporary comics and pick some examples actually that I used in an exhibit at the Charles Schulz Museum called The Language of Lines. Cartoonists today continue to use many of the graphic tricks of their predecessors and have also invented new visual devices. Bill Watterson featured imaginative variations on time-honored techniques to create a hyper-kinetic visual style in Calvin and Hobbes. In this episode, Calvin shows off his remarkable range of expression. Gary Trudeau chose not to draw caricatures of the real politicians that he featured in his comic strip Doonesbury. Instead, he created icons that reflected their unique personalities. President Bill Clinton was represented by a waffle, and Speaker of the House Newt Gingrich was depicted as a time bomb. Later on, he drew President George W. Bush as an asterisk underneath an empty cowboy hat. After the start of the Iraq War, Trudeau replaced it with a Roman helmet, which became more battered as the conflict continued. One of the few politicians that he actually does draw in caricature is our current president, Donald Trump. Berkeley Breathed invented some of his own Comicana terms in his comic strip Bloom County. I asked Breathed once if he was influenced by the lexicon when he did this page, and he denied that he was. This episode of Shoe by Jeff McNally made a loud statement about the reduced size of comics. So you can change the size of your lettering to denote the volume of the dialogue. Billy's footprints are a unique visual device that was invented by Bill and Jeff Keane in Family Circus. Here's Billy takes a detour through the comics pages. Pictures can represent sound effects as in the Baby Blues strip by Rick Kirkman and Jerry Scott. Wolfie in Mutts by Patrick McDonald comes up with a new symbol for hunger. Red makes some funny faces after he tastes Rover's food. Brian Bassett credited Jim Borgman as the inspiration for this strip. Max in Stone Soup by Jan Elliott has some mixed emanata about his new sister. My editor at New York Review Comics wanted me to change that word to emojis, but emoji to me is a different thing. Mike Peters speculates about how cartoon characters got their ideas before Edison invented the light bulb in his strip Mother Goose and Grimm. I love that one. Stephan Pastis in Pearls Before Swine suggests that comic characters can magically produce their own light bulbs and never run out of them. A Bizarro panel by Dan Ferraro shows a man shopping for Grolixes that profanity supplies. Another Bizarro panel by Wayno shows a guy who has trouble interpreting fumetti. Leo by Mark Tituli has no trouble telling Santa what he wants for Christmas. Leo is what's called a pantomime strip. It doesn't have any words, dialogue words. Connie in Zitz barks at her son like a dog, and Jeremy is not on the same wavelength as his mother. Jim Borgman, the artist on this popular strip, is particularly adept at visual communication. Included in the lexicon is this cartoonist license drawn by Chance Brown for all who successfully learn its many lessons. Chance wrote, possession of this document allows the bearer to take many liberties with the human anatomy, and I'll let you read the rest. Inanimate objects, etc. But so that's the end of my presentation. I'll go back to the main screen and see you all there.
Thank you, Brian. That was so great. I especially loved seeing all those contemporary examples. There was a lot in there that I hadn't seen before. That was really, really excellent.
Yeah,
I
I have.
love that shoe piece. I've never seen
Yeah,
that
actually,
shoe
the
on.
original of that belongs to our friend Bill Janoka.
Nice. Okay. Lucky
Um,
guy.
but I actually have like an entire file box full of comics on comics and symbols and like and anytime I see it on my computer, I drag it into a folder.
I was gonna ask, so you've been like collecting these and clipping
Yeah.
them? Yeah.
I mean, I must say that those are definitely some of the better ones. The examples are really good.
Yeah, they're fantastic. Well, thank you for that. Looks like we've got some questions, so we'll jump into the audience Q&A. Just a reminder to everyone tuning in, please put all your questions for Brian into the Q&A function instead of the chat. It's just easier for us to keep track of them over there. So you can start placing those in the Q&A whenever. Okay, so John Rose actually is here and is asking, hi Brian, your book Beetle Bailey, 75 Years of Smiles is a beautiful book. Since Hi and Lois will turn 75 in a few years, do you have plans to do a similar book chronicling 75 years of that wonderful strip too? I hope so.
Please write Gary Groth a letter. I'm constantly twisting his arm, but yeah, I would like to do more books exactly like that one because it came out so beautifully. I was so happy with the end product. The designer at Fantagraphics did a fantastic job on it, and Gary was very supportive, and so was King Features. So it's one of the rare times when a book project goes exactly as you hoped it would, which
Yeah,
is
that
rare,
is rare.
very rare.
Okay. Kevin Wolf asks, did Mort did Mort collect these comic ideas to name over years, or did he develop them when he put together the original book?
Well, you can see, but he did. Um, he definitely saw that Charles Rice article. On the back of the original book, I think he said, that he saw it in the 1930s or something, and said we've done some detective work and we traced the original article to that 1946 article. And so, I mean, that definitely got him on that track. And the the pieces that he did for the Cartoon Society newsletter predate the book. Those were done in the 60s. So he was already kind of working through coming up with ideas. Um, I mean, the panel at the museum, you could see, I think that was most of it, and the book certainly expanded quite a bit from there. Like typically with Mort, he'd say, here's my book, and it would just be a pile of sketches and random ideas and little pencil notes and things like that. So whenever I did a book with him, there was a lot of editing to put it into some form. So I mean, I even in the original Comicana book, I invented some of the terms like bubonics and
You did? Yeah.
Symbolia and stuff like that. I just, I'm filling in places that he hadn't finished off or whatever.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, we are so happy to have the original art from it. And in fact, I believe that at least one piece from the of the original art is going to be in our redesigned permanent collection gallery that we're reopening with in late May. I only
Mhm.
wish he didn't use felt tip pen because
Yeah,
as the cartoonists and archivists out there know, it doesn't age too well,
yeah. I
from a
think we
preservation
actually
standpoint.
stuck that down with double stick tape too, which
Yeah.
was like I said,
I'm glad it survived. So.
yeah, when we started the museum, we knew nothing about archival paper or, any of that kind of stuff.
Okay, so another question from Kevin Wolf. Did Mort keep a thesaurus nearby, or were all of the words he used off the top of his head?
Um, I think they just came out of his subconscious mostly. I think yes, he did have dictionaries and thesauruses and stuff that he would consult, but I think he just, it's one of the words, plewds, which actually goes back to the Charles Rice one, I think, is in that. And one time we had Bern Hogarth as one of our celebrity lectures at the museum, and Bern was quite pompous, as a, like a art historian kind of.
Mm.
He taught at the School of Visual Arts, so he would go off in all these fancy terms, and he said, "But the plewds comes from the Greek word pluvius." My father looked at me and kind of shrugged and said, "I didn't know that." So I didn't, he probably didn't know where some of these words came from, but they sounded right when he wrote them down, I think.
I mean, yeah, I think I've mispronounced so many of them, including the title. I've always said Comicana, so I'm glad to hear you say Comicana is how it's pronounced.
Comicana. That's
But like
actually the
a
name
lot
of
of
our family corporation is Comicana Inc.
perfect. I think so many of them are like pretty intuitive, like wafted. Is it waft?
Waftarom.
Yeah, like that one makes a lot of sense to me. Others, I'm like, I have no idea where he came up with them.
Yeah. Well, you
Um,
get that protusilation one is a little hard to get off the tongue.
yeah. Okay. Some more questions coming in. Are there plans to reprint Backstage at the Strips?
Um, no plans. I've thought about it. Um, one piece of news that interesting to some people is my editor at New York Review of Comics asked me if I might be interested in doing a reprint of my Nancy book.
Hmm.
So that might happen. You
I
see,
think that would be amazing. I'm all for that.
I have all the paste ups and everything, mechanicals. I mean, the lexicon was all done old fashioned, photo typesetting, rubber cement, and it was in surprisingly good shape. They were able to scan it and clean it up a little bit. But I don't know how many people remember the old days of doing, you know, hand mechanical layouts before computers were
Right.
came along. The backstage at the strips, one of the goals with the Beetle Bailey book was to produce a book of much higher quality than a lot of the books that had been done before. And, my father wasn't a real stickler for detail. And I think, unfortunately, the reproduction quality in Backstage at the Strips is not good. There were things that he just would, run off on his copying machine and send to the publisher, and they would just stick it in like that. And I mean, with the Beetle Bailey book, everything was at least a 600 DPI
Right.
full-size scan of original artwork and everything. Things have changed.
Yeah. Come a long way. Um, okay. Hal Rammel asks, have any of the terms in the lexicon entered more general usage?
Oh, definitely. Um, I think some of them have ended up in like something like Grawlixes. I see that a lot around a lot, you know. They definitely are in some of the slang dictionaries.
Oh, cool. Huh.
I don't know that with the name of the specific ones, but I've definitely seen them in there. And I think a few of them have even made it into the, the Webster's or, one of those ones.
Right. Are all Julie Verlick asks, are all of these terms natural parts of your vocabulary now? I'm curious about that too. Like, there's so many terms. Do you remember
Yeah.
what all of them are?
But that was what Chris Ware was, like back in his college days. These nerdy art students were all like, wow, you got some really nice Grolixes there, and they would do that ironically and always, um, yeah, I mean, we talk about that all the time about because I mean we still use Grolixes because you still can't use swear words in the newspaper comic strip. So you kind of I think people know exactly, when you come across that, you see the symbols and your mind uses a four-letter word probably and just fills in the blanks. I mean, you kind of make a mental connection with it.
Right. Okay. Question from Arnav. Hi, Brian. I'm currently working on my thesis animation with Emanata and onomatopoeia. How do you decide when to create or invent new Emanata symbols?
Well, I think that's one of the things that, cartoonists are always not only breaking rules, but inventing new ones, and they're always coming up with new ideas. Like that was what was so interesting about those contemporary examples, because, Patrick McDonald came up with this symbol that it looks like a little stomach or something
Right. I
for
love that.
hunger. And I don't know if anybody else has used that, maybe that'll catch on. Other cartoonists will start using it.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think that's one thing that's really true about cartoonists. They're like compulsively creative and very inventive in terms of coming up with new ways of using old symbols or creating new ones. Or
Have you created any?
have I created any? I don't know. I
I
mean,
mean, it sounds
always
like you helped your dad name a bunch of them, so you can take
yeah,
credit.
well, sometimes you need to do invent something that doesn't exist in real life, like,
Right.
colored snow or something, what would you call that?
Okay. How did the foreign edition of the original book come to be?
Um, so we have a big publishing program. Beetle Bailey is very popular in Scandinavia, and they have regular magazines that come out in Norway, Sweden, Finland, Denmark, all translated in all those different languages and everything. So we have a huge publishing program over there. So the Danish one, I think, was done by our Danish publishers. I think there have been some other ones. Beetle's also very popular in Brazil. He's
Wow.
known as
Really?
Recruta Zero. I have a Brazilian house painter that paints my house every couple of years. And I told him, I said, my father created Beetle Bailey, and there was no recognition. And then I showed him one of the comic books, and he goes, "Oh, Recruta Zero is very popular in Brazil,
Huh.
And I had my father do sketches for all the guys and everything. So yeah, some of our books have been translated into that's Portuguese in Brazil. And I haven't actually I don't have any other foreign language books, but I know some others have been done in the lexicon.
Hmm. That's amazing to me that it's so huge in some of these other countries, like in the
Yeah.
Netherlands and stuff. I wonder why it caught on in some
Yeah,
particular
I mean,
places not.
my father often said that, we could probably survive just on the income that we get from the Scandinavian publishers. I mean, it's incredible.
Huh.
And why is that? I don't know.
Right.
It's not like in Sweden, they have universal conscription. So everybody, men, women, they all serve for a fairly short time in the army.
Okay.
and they don't really go to war. They're not in any combat situation. So it's kind of like Beetle Bailey,
Oh, that's a good point.
they're
Yeah.
mopping floors and peeling potatoes and stuff like that.
Right.
Um,
That makes sense. Okay, Mike Zim asks, did Mort consider copywriting any of the Tetiology faces? Happy, sad, etc. Harvey Ball was paid $45 to draw the smiley face in 1967, which was later copyrighted and now brings in millions.
oh. Well, we have a copyright on the book itself, but I don't think that each individual, I mean, there's a lot like the Jim Borgman has a poster that he did with that's what Brian Bassett was crediting for, that you can find that on the internet. And I think you can buy the poster and all the facial expressions, different ones. It's really nicely done. So that whole thing, is is pretty ubiquitous. I think it's almost like public domain or something at this point.
Mhm. Julie Stanish asks, I think, kind of a big question of like, do you have any sense of where these comic shortcuts came from? I think like the cartooning shorthand, that all of these terms are part of,
Mhm.
and how great it is that he captured them.
It's interesting. I do. My daughter is a fourth grade teacher in Philadelphia, and I used to go and talk to her class. In fact, I talked to my daughter's class when she went to school here in Connecticut. And I often use the lexicon lessons to teach the kids. So I'll just do a circle and I'll put the eyes and the nose and the mouth, and then you could change the eyes and put a line like that, and suddenly they look angry or whatever, and the kids love it. And then I'll get into the emanata and I'll draw the light bulb, and I said, "What does this mean?" And he says, "The guy has an idea." And I say to them, "How do you know that?
Hmm.
Did your teacher tell you that?" And they say, "I don't know. I just know it."
Right. Yeah.
So I
Strange.
think it's wired into our brains, really, because there's symbols like that. There's the heart, when you're in love with somebody, or the dotted line when you're staring at somebody, or any of that. The plewds, that somebody's either nervous or scared or something like that. And these young kids, they they know all of these symbols, and they don't know how they learned them.
Yeah, it's remarkable. I mean, I guess some of them, like whatever you would call, I guess the emanata of like kind of a scratchy line above someone's head if they're angry or something like that, just
Yeah.
innately like makes sense. Scribble
Yeah. I
feels like
mean,
it is that type of energy of anger or something,
yeah.
but it
I'm,
really is incredible, and also just how much it transcends languages. I mean, emanata and all that stuff is such a huge part of manga too,
yeah.
and
Yeah.
yeah,
And I think, yeah, I mean, I think some of it's universal symbolism. Like, it's something, maybe it comes from us, and cartoonists are just mimicking it or whatever.
right.
Um, but I don't know. It's interesting. Somebody should do that study.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, just one or two more questions before we wrap up. Mike Rohde's asking about reprinting any of the exhibit catalogs that you've worked on. I know there's probably been a lot, so I don't know. Do you know if any of them have been reprinted?
Uh, in the early years of the museum, and you probably experienced this too, we always used to get some donor to give us $300 so we could do a catalog, and then we would end up with all these boxes in the closets and stuff. Because you'd sell maybe during the course of an exhibit like maybe a couple hundred catalogs, and you'd print 1,000 of them.
Right,
So
right.
I have lots of catalogs from the old days, but
So message Brian if you want one.
but I know that Kim Munson, who wrote that wonderful book about comic art in museums, I did a couple of essays that appeared in her Eisner nominated book,
Right.
has got me writing an account for her new book about an exhibit I did at the Barnum Museum in Bridgeport, Connecticut, 1995. And I just pulled out this box from it, and I've got photographs and budgets and press releases and invitations to the openings, and it's very nostalgic to go back and look at all that stuff.
I'm sure. Yeah. Um, Someone is asking, oh, Matt Topper is asking, how did Chris Ware come to be involved with the project?
Um, so I met Chris Ware at a dinner in Los Angeles at this very, very fancy restaurant after the opening of the Masters of American Comics exhibit. And we were sitting next to each other, and he was one of the masters featured in the exhibit. The guy's just an amazing genius. And he turned to me and he said, I just wanted to tell you that I really love that book that your father did, the Lexicon of Comicana. I had that when I was in college, and I still have it right next to my drawing board. And I said, well, that's amazing. So we talked about it for a while. And I said, well, if we ever do a reprint, would you write a foreword? He said, sure. And that was like 15 years ago or so.
Right.
So he was at Nancy Fest, and I came up to him and I said, so we're reprinting the lexicon. You going to write the foreword? He said, what? I said, you promised me you would. I did. They said, sure. Yeah, that'll be fun.
Good. Well, actually, good timing because I was going to mention at the end of this that when we do reopen our galleries, we've been closed for construction for a while. In addition to reopening with our redesigned permanent collection gallery, we're reopening with a Chris Ware exhibit.
Wow.
It's called Life is Complicated, and he has a version of it was traveling around different museums in Europe. The Billy Ireland iteration has been sort of recurated by Chris and completely designed specifically for our space. And the Billy Ireland will be the only US location for this exhibit. So, for folks
Wow.
interested in coming to visit us, we're going to be reopening May 23rd, and that show will be up throughout the end of 2026. So, lots of time to come see it.
I hope you have one of his handmade vending machines. I
We,
mean,
yeah, we actually, I don't know if it's going to be a vending machine, but he is bringing a bunch of his like mechanical
yeah,
creations that are going to be part of
yeah.
the show.
I mean,
So,
he's so brilliant because he does everything from long form graphic novels to New Yorker covers to album covers. He's an amazing calligrapher,
yeah.
but he also like makes things, out of wood and stuff like that. So
Right, right. I know. Totally. Yeah. Brilliant guy.
amazing.
Well, that brings us to almost seven, and there's lots of great comments in the chat. I'll download that and send it to you, Brian. Just people who are really, really grateful for this reprint happening and for your presentation tonight. Some requests for your slideshow if you're willing to share it. This event was recorded, so we will likely be putting this on our YouTube page. If you check it in about a month or so, it should be live there.
Yeah.
Um, and lastly, before I close out, I just want to mention a few upcoming events we have that are specific to our physical location here in Columbus. On March 14th, we're hosting Mini Comics Day. So that's from 2 to 4 p.m. It's very informal, fun. Come in, make some mini comics with friends and your community from 2 to 4 p.m. on March 14th. Our comics critique night series, the next event for that is March 17th. You can bring in any comic or cartoon art or even zine work that you're working on and get feedback from peers. And then the next meeting of our graphic novel book club will be April 16th. So thank you so much, everyone, for attending, and thank you so much for Brian for being with us this evening.
Yeah, it was fun. I mean, I've never done this before. I mean, I
You
said
did
I got
great.
all these images, so what am I going to say about them? But it's actually, it sounds kind of serious, but it's mostly fun, I think, And
Definitely.
that's, I think, the magic of the lexicon, because as Chris Ware writes in the introduction, which just blew me away, he said, Mort Walker was one of the first people to ever take this stuff seriously.
Yep.
The guts of the comics, the thing that the devices that cartoonists use to communicate. and nobody ever took it seriously. And Mort put it into this book, which was semi-serious, and here we are. We're still talking about it.
Right. And as I mentioned before we went live, for the longest time this book was out of print and copies
Yeah,
were like in the high hundreds on eBay. So
yeah,
it's really fantastic that
yeah.
you've got this reprint out there.
Yeah.
So thanks for
One of the
that.
people that kept reminding me that it was out of print and was always it was Lucy Caswell, because she used it in her class there at Ohio State,
Yeah,
and she said she couldn't get copies of it for the students, and
right.
that's a crime.
Right.
So we
Well,
fixed.
everyone go get your copy now. And it's beautiful. Thank you so much, Brian.
All right, thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Bye.
Bye.